Hello and welcome to this summit session. I'm Stephen I. Weiss, senior staff writer at Inc. magazine, and I'm here with Hubert Joly, formerly CEO of Best Buy, currently at Harvard Business School. Hubert, thank you for joining us.
Stephen, I look forward to our conversation.
Thank you. So one of the common statements that I hear when talking about morality with CEOs or VCs is a sentiment along the lines of, well, I have an ethical obligation to generate the maximum return for my investors. But you don't think that's true. Why?
I believe that the ultimate purpose of business is to contribute to the common good, and that we need this urgent refoundation of business around pursuing a noble purpose, putting people at the center, and treating profit as an outcome. If we're too focused on profits, we make mistakes. If we're focused on purpose and people, then we create great results for everybody.
So what is a time when you decided to put some other concern ahead of profits?
Well, it's ahead of profits from a sequential standpoint. So let's take the turnaround of Best Buy. Back in 2012, when everybody thought we were going to die, the key advice I was getting from investors and analysts was cut, cut, cut. Stephen, the usual recipe for turnarounds. You're going to have to close stores, fire a lot of people. Well, we looked, all of the stores were profitable, so I didn't think that it was such a brilliant idea. And firing a lot of people, it was as if people were the problem. I thought people would be the source of the solution. So this idea starts with listening to the frontliners. I spent a week in a store in St. Cloud, Minnesota, to listen to them and ask them what's working, what's not working, what you need. And my job was super easy, right? Listen, take notes, and do as I was told, because they had all of the answers. Also on headcount reduction, I think headcount reduction is as a last resort. So in our approach, we focus first on growing the revenue. And as we did to cost, and we did take $2 billion of cost out, we focus first on reducing non-salary expenses, which is all of the elements of the cost structure that have nothing to do with people. So with this approach, we were able to re-energize the customer experience, remobilize the employees, and of course, that led to a great outcome. The share price went from $11 to about $100 8 years later. So that's what we're talking about.
And it's always nice to have a story of an agenda for purpose that does lead to more profits. But are there never any times when you actually had to say, well, we have to abandon this pursuit of profit in order to get some ethical obligation done, or does it always work the other direction?
Well, there's clearly sometimes tension, in particular in terms of the ability to address purpose and profit at the same time. But we need to start with a declaration of interdependence. The idea that business can be successful in isolation is crazy. Best Buy is headquartered in Minneapolis. So following the murder of George Floyd, when the city is on fire, you cannot open the stores. Or if to quote, Rebecca Anderson, if the planet is on fire, that's our biggest business risk. What's interesting is to lean into the tensions between various stakeholders. So let's say you're working in the food industry, and you're being challenged, as it being the case recently, to have food that's healthier. Well, overnight, that may challenge your revenue, but down the road, that may lead you to get positioned as a winner in the space. So understanding these tensions and trying to find win-win ways to address them over time, I think is the right approach. It's difficult, but that's our responsibility as leaders.
But size of a company and focus of a company can affect that balance, whereas a restaurant can try to be the healthy food provider, but not succeed amid a larger society in which unhealthy food is provided. And similarly, for any ethical objective that a company might have, where their competitive advantage is lost because they're trying to do the right thing, but they're not quite big enough to shift the world. They're not quite big enough to shift the culture in which they find themselves. So how did they find that balance?
I think that we can always, I'm going to be harsh, right? But we can always find excuses. Don't you love this leader because they have the most compelling, most creative excuses in the world? I think our responsibility is to find solutions that are win-win-win. Again, in 2012, during the Best Buy turnaround, we actually preserved some of our key initiatives around the planet and the community. So, for example, our recycling program, we could have decided to cancel it, but we found actually it was a great traffic driver. So even though in of itself it was not profitable, it was a good way to get customers, help customers, and save the planet. So again, I think our responsibility is to understand these tensions and creatively find ways that allow us to come out swinging. I think other than COVID, Stephen, there is another pandemic in the world that we need to cure, which is the pandemic of zero-sum game. The only way for this interview to go well, Stephen, is if you are amazing and I'm terrible. That's stupid, right? So that's our responsibility as leaders, is force ourselves to find these win-win-wins. And I think in the startup world, my colleague at Harvard, Ranjay Gulati, has written about the soul of the startup. I think the best startup are those that are trying to solve an important problem in the world in a way that they're uniquely qualified to do and in a way that makes money and that they're passionate about. It's the intersection between these four dimensions: what the world needs, what we're passionate about, what we're uniquely good at, and how we can make money. That's how you get successful companies.
And when you run Best Buy, so there's a power imbalance between a corporation and its executives and the workforce at lower levels of compensation. And one of the ways that society has come up with that to correct it is through labor unions, to allow labor to collectively bargain. So how do you respond to that desire to correct the power imbalance and collectively bargain?
I think that's when a company, certainly in the US, is finding itself in a situation where there's attempts to unionize. I think that's a poor reflection on management. In the retail space, forget about Best Buy for a second. My colleague at Harvard and MIT, Zeneb Tan, has written about the good jobs strategy. She's shown that companies, let's say like Costco, for example, that invest in their people, takes good care of them, make sure that their job is doable and productive and inspiring. These are the companies that get the best results. So I think the wisdom of management is not to wait to have a unionization threat to invest in people, but to do this proactively because it makes good business sense.
But doesn't every manager, every company owner believe that they're acting in the best interest of their people and putting their people first, even if we find out that they're not? We just saw the unionization effort at Amazon's warehouse in Staten Island, and where employees were substantially more likely to face an injury than at any other warehouse in America, outside of Amazon. So, and I'm sure that the Amazon leadership at many points was saying, we're doing the right things, we're putting our employees first. So, how do you correct that assumption in your own head as a company leader without the outside voice of collective bargaining?
Yeah, unfortunately, there's often a gap between our intent and reality. That's true in our personal lives. I think that's also true in corporate life. So, Stephen, one of the things I've found is that as a CEO, if you're trying to lead the company from your office, from your conference room table, looking at spreadsheets, it's not going to work. You have to be on the front line. You have to be with employees. You have to, personally experience what they're going through. Same with the customers, by the way. You need to build a balanced scorecard in your measurements. And so, because staying isolated is a big risk. Complacency is the biggest risk that any successful company is facing. So you just need to get out, spend time, force yourself, set a set of objective in terms of how much time I'm going to spend on the road, visiting stores or hotels if you're in that space, being on the front line. I think it's General Patton who said, you cannot push a noodle, you have to pull a noodle. I don't say that our companies are noodles, but I think you get what I'm saying.
Understood. So retail is one of those areas where employees have been pushed increasingly hard in recent years for less substantial increases in pay, and one could add food service and hospitality to that list. So how do you drive a focus on employees in a competitive environment where the industry you're in is often known for the opposite?
I think America has let the frontliners down in the last 50 years. You're absolutely right, Stephen. I think that in large retailers, that's the space I've spent most of my time in the last 10 years, have realized this. And you've seen in the last, I'm going to say 5 years, a significant increase in starting wages, and a significant increase in benefits. I think companies like Walmart, Target, certainly Best Buy, have driven the change in this area. And if we step back, social inequity, tensions in our society, during COVID, many of us had to step back. and say the world we live in is not working, right? We have a health crisis, of course, but also an economic crisis, societal issues, racial tensions, environmental time bomb, geopolitical tension. It's not working. And what's the definition of madness, Stephen, right? Doing the same thing and hoping for a different outcome. And so there's a realization that we need this urgent refoundation of business around business being a force for good and people, and embracing all stakeholders, treating profit as an outcome. And so that tells you then that starting with treating your employees, making sure that their basic needs are addressed, but also creating an environment. This is what we've learned at Best Buy, where they can connect what drives them with their work, creating an environment, as I call it in the heart of business, where you can unleash human magic. That's a huge priority of management. If you do this, the results are almost irrationally good. They're so good, you get surprised.
You spoke earlier about George Floyd in Minneapolis. We've seen a wide array of corporate responses to the Black Lives Matter movement. So how do you think corporations should be responding more generally to Black Lives Matter?
I think that, generally speaking, diversity and inclusion, building a workforce that is representative of the customers you're serving and the communities in which you operate, is not only a moral responsibility, but a business imperative. And I think it's just tragic that for too many years, companies have treated diversity and inclusion as an afterthought, as something that you do after you've thought about everything else. For me, one of the things I've learned is that this is core to the business. If you can create an environment where everybody feels they belong, right, then that's how you create extraordinary results. And the minute you see diversity and inclusion as a business problem on top of being a moral imperative, then one of the things you remember is that companies know how to deal with business problems. The problem is that we've not applied that logic and that focus to diversity, in particular as relates to the Black community. So do the work. Look at, are you able to have Black individuals, Black African-American candidates apply? If they apply, do they get recruited? If they get recruited, do you retain them? Are you able to promote them and have them go all the way to the top? If not, what are the friction points? It's exactly the same as a marketing problem in terms of recruiting and retaining and growing customer relationships. So I feel, Stephen, that following the murder of George Floyd, there's been clearly, how could you not, clearly a realization that this was an urgent imperative. And now you're seeing companies set goals, boards are holding management teams accountable, and we're seeing progress. It's encouraging. If we stay with it, I'm confident that we can get to the bottom of this.
And one of the things that you're doing a lot right now is coaching CEOs and other executives, speaking to them through the Harvard Business School. Can you tell me, what is the one message that they aren't hearing well enough that you think more CEOs need to hear from you?
I think I'm really impressed by the next generation of leaders. The key thought maybe for these leaders is, during COVID, when you couldn't go outside, you had to go inside. And so spending time with yourself, slowing down, and reflecting on what kind of a leader you want to be. What are the principles with which you want to lead? How do you want to be remembered? So self-reflection, I think, is foundational to great leadership today.
So Hubert, it's not unheard of for executives to speak out about a more socially responsible approach to capitalism later in their careers. It's less common to hear them speak about their pasts in frank terms and to name names. What are some moments in your past where you saw conduct you would like to have seen done differently?
I think that if we look back at the last 20 years or 40 years, when we were living in that Milton Friedman world, we saw some excesses. We saw some, unfortunately, executives who are too driven by power, fame, glory, or money, and that led them to do the wrong thing. I remember in particular, Jeff Skilling, the CEO of Enron. He happened to have been, when he was at McKinsey, my evaluator when I was a partner at the firm. Very smart guy. But this, we all remember that story. It's about hubris and being, somebody you don't need to be. And so for me, these cases are an invitation to go back to, our values and our purpose in life. I think personal purpose and personal values are the foundation of corporate purpose and corporate values. It changes everything when you start from within. It's leadership from the inside out. And I firmly believe that in the heart of every human being, there's a desire to do something good. And even Darth Vader, his son, believed there's some good in him. So go figure.
All right. May the force be with all of us. Hubert Joly, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Stephen.